Justin Arnold's days as a tower guard had melded into a numbing routine. Each night a mirror of the last, the prison's towering stone walls echoing his own feelings of entrapment. The silence of the institution gnawed at him, as if the very air had been drained of life, leaving him suspended in a world of isolation. Yet a singular night, that monotonous existence was shattered. His eyes, accustomed to the shadows, detected an aberration near the prison's edge. Adjusting his binoculars, he uncovered a pallid figure lingering just beyond the periphery of the flickering floodlights. Emotionless eyes stared into his soul, and a disconcerting chill skated down his spine. A mixture of intrigue and unease compelled Justin to maintain his vigil. He remained fixated on the inexplicable phenomenon, his heart racing in tandem with his curiosity. However, a rising tide of caution urged him to transmit his discovery over the radio, beckoning for another guard tower's perspective. Fingers gripping the radio's cold plastic, he initiated contact. 10-9, this is Tower 2. Do we have a trusty movement along the south side perimeter? His voice, though steady, carried an undercurrent of tension. Seconds passed like an eternity before a crackling response punctured the silence. Negative, Tower 2. All trustees are accounted for and confined. The static-laden voice of Tower 10-9 seeped through, dispelling any notion of a routine explanation. Returning to his binoculars, Justin's pulse quickened. The figure, however, was gone, leaving behind nothing but the barren landscape. His thoughts raced, his mind dissecting the implications of what he had seen. As unease twisted within him, the radio buzzed to life once more, the sergeant's voice sounding over the line. Tower 2, hold tight. We're sending someone to investigate. Stay alert. Sergeant Sander's tone resonated with a mixture of command and concern, a sentiment that echoed Justin's own apprehensions. The minutes dragged on, the air becoming thick with uncertainty. The minutes stretched into eternity as Justin scanned the area where the pale figure had stood. The radio crackled, the sergeant's voice like a lifeline. Tower 2, we've searched the area. Nothing. Keep a sharp eye, but stay cautious. His heart still racing, Justin gripped his binoculars, the weight of the night even heavier now. The exchange had left a lingering tension in the air, a reminder that even the walls that were meant to confine also concealed untold secrets. The hours of his shift wore on, the haunting image of the figure imprinted in his mind, etching its mark onto his perception of the prison's world. As the sky lightened with the approaching dawn, Justin's watch finally came to an end. The transition from darkness to light felt like a reprieve, yet the memory of the pale figure lingered like a specter in his thoughts. He descended from his tower, a weary sentinel bearing the weight of an encounter that defied explanation. In the days that followed, Justin couldn't shake the image from his mind. The pale figure's haunting presence had become a constant shadow, a specter that seemed to linger at the edge of his thoughts even during the brightest hours of day. But it was during the night, when the prison embraced darkness like an old friend, that its hold on him tightened. One evening, as Justin assumed his position in the tower, a shiver slithered down his spine. He could have sworn he heard the faint echo of footsteps, the sound of soft, muted shuffling. His heart raced, and his grip on his binoculars tightened. Swiveling around, he cast his gaze over the prison yard, a field of emptiness punctuated only by the cold light of the moon. There was no one in sight. Brushing off his unease as a trick of his imagination, he turned his attention back to the perimeter. But the feeling of being watched persisted, an invisible gaze that bore into him like an icy breath on the back of his neck. The hours dragged on, and the eerie sensation clung to him like a shroud, an unrelenting presence that left his nerves on edge. As the night deepened, a sudden movement at the edge of his vision drew his attention. He jerked his head toward the source, his pulse quickening. A dark shadow seemed to dart around the corner of a nearby wall, just at the edge of the floodlight's reach. His heart pounded against his ribs as he trained his binoculars on the spot, his breath caught in his throat. There was nothing. No movement, no sign of life. Just the oppressive stillness of the night. He blinked, convinced his eyes were playing tricks on him. Perhaps fatigue was finally taking its toll, but the unease that gnawed at him remained, a persistent reminder that something was amiss. Hours passed, each second an eternity, as the feeling of being watched intensified. Justin's fingers clenched the edge of his seat, his senses heightened to a state of hyper-awareness, and then a sound, a whisper, faint and indistinct like the rustle of leaves carried on a gentle breeze. Justin. The word was barely audible, a mere breath of sound that seemed to dance at the edges of his consciousness. He froze, his heart pounding in his chest. Had he really heard that? Was it just his imagination running wild in the silence? But then came another noise, distinct and undeniable. The sound of footsteps, soft but deliberate, echoing through the night. Justin's breath caught in his throat as he swiveled, his binoculars scanning the shadows. There, at the edge of the floodlights, stood a figure. The pale face, hollow eyes, and ethereal aura were unmistakable. It was the same figure he had seen before, the one that had haunted his every thought. Only this time it was closer, its presence more palpable, and the air around it seemed to grow colder. Justin's heart pounded in his chest, his breath quickening as the ghostly form advanced. His fingers trembled around the binoculars, his mind racing to comprehend the impossible. Panic surged within him, threatening to overwhelm his senses. And then, just as he was about to turn and flee, the figure's form contorted, distorting into a grotesque shape that seemed to defy the laws of reality. A guttural growl filled the air, a sound that echoed with anguish and malevolence. Justin's blood turned to ice, and his body seized with fear. A sudden gust of wind extinguished the nearby light, plunging the area into darkness. Justin's heart raced, his breathing ragged, as he strained to see through the inky blackness. The sense of being watched intensified, a weight that pressed upon him from all sides. As he fumbled for his flashlight, a sensation of movement brushed against his skin. It was as if unseen fingers caressed his arm, sending a shiver down his spine. His hands trembled as he struggled to steady the flashlight, his thoughts a whirlwind of terror. With a flicker, the flashlight illuminated the area once more, and Justin's blood turned to ice. The figure was no longer in front of him. It was now right behind him, its hollow eyes boring into the back of his head. A scream tore from Justin's throat as he spun around, his heart racing as he came face to face with the ghostly apparition. It was inches from him, its distorted form contorting and shifting in the dim light. Its mouth opened in a silent scream, a sound that reverberated within Justin's mind. Paralyzed by fear, Justin could only watch as the figure's shadowy hand reached out toward him, its fingers stretching impossibly long as they brushed against his cheek. The touch was cold, like death itself, sending a shockwave of terror through his entire being. The air seemed to thicken, each heartbeat echoing like a drumbeat in Justin's ears. His skin crawled, his mind struggling to process the surreal horror that had unfolded before him. He was trapped in a waking nightmare, a prisoner of his own fear. And then, as abruptly as it had appeared, the figure retreated into the darkness, dissolving into the shadows like smoke. The oppressive tension lifted, replaced by a gnawing emptiness that left Justin trembling and disoriented. As he stood there, his senses still reeling, a distant sound pierced through the silence. It was a voice. No, several voices whispering and murmuring in a chorus of eerie cadence. The words were indistinct, yet they carried a weight of malevolence that sent a fresh surge of terror coursing through Justin's veins. For a moment, he felt like a puppet caught in the hands of unseen strings, manipulated by forces beyond his comprehension. He fought to regain control of his body, his instincts screaming at him to flee to escape the suffocating grip of the prison's darkness. And then, with a violent jolt, Justin's eyes snapped open. He was no longer in the tower. He lay on the cold floor, his heart still racing, his body drenched in a cold sweat. The sound of footsteps echoed in the distance, accompanied by the soft murmur of voices. Struggling to regain his bearings, Justin pushed himself into a sitting position. He was surrounded by the dim, sterile light of the prison's infirmary. Sergeant Sander and a couple of correctional officers stood nearby, their expressions a mix of concern and curiosity. As his mind raced to piece together the fragments of his memory, Justin's voice emerged as a tremor. "Sergeant Sander, I saw something. In the tower. A figure. Pale and distorted. It reached out to me." His words spilled out in a rush, his desperation to convey the horror he had witnessed evident in every syllable. Sergeant Sander exchanged a glance with the other officers before turning his attention back to Justin. His voice was measured, a blend of skepticism and reassurance. "Take it easy, Arnold. You've had quite a scare. What you're describing, it could be a result of stress, fatigue. Hallucinations can happen in this line of work." Justin's hands trembled as he recounted the details, his voice unwavering despite the fear that still gripped him. He spoke of the figure's hollow eyes, the chilling touch, and the voices that seemed to weave a tapestry of dread in the air. The officers exchanged uneasy glances, the atmosphere in the room growing palpably tense. One of them cleared his throat before speaking. "Being alone up there in the tower by yourself, it can make your mind start seeing things, but it's probably just your nerves, Arnold." Justin looked at the officers, a mixture of dismay and frustration clouding his expression. The disbelief in their eyes mirrored his own internal struggle. Before he could voice his defense, Sergeant Sander stepped in, his voice carrying a mix of concern and authority. "Hey, why don't you finish the shift in the infirmary? It'll give you some time to gather yourself." Sighing inwardly with both gratitude and frustration, Justin nodded in reluctant agreement. He pushed himself to his feet, his legs feeling like unsteady pillars beneath him. He cast a final glance at the officers, the unspoken tension between them leaving an imprint in the air. In the following days, the prison was steeped in an atmosphere of unease. Justin's encounter was not an isolated incident. Whispers and hushed conversations began to circulate among the guards, accounts of strange figures glimpsed at the periphery of their vision, chilling whispers that seemed to be carried by the wind itself. Even Sergeant Sander and the other officers were not immune to the unnerving occurrences. Their once skeptical expressions had shifted to ones of grim acknowledgement. It was as if the very walls of the prison were exhaling a long-held secret, one that had finally breached the surface. One night, as the moon hung low in the sky, a chilling incident unfolded that erased any lingering doubts. Sergeant Sander and several officers were patrolling the prison grounds, their flashlights cutting through the darkness like beacons of cautious illumination. As they rounded a corner, a figure appeared before them, a pale and distorted specter that seemed to defy the laws of the natural world. The guards froze, their breath caught in their throats as hollow eyes fixed upon them. The air grew colder and an otherworldly tension settled over the scene. Then, with an eerie whisper that seemed to weave through the night, the figure spoke. "Help me." The voice was a haunting murmur that seemed to snake its way into their minds, sending a shiver down their spines. The guards exchanged startled glances, the weight of the situation sinking in. This was not a mere trick of the imagination. It was a malevolent presence that defied explanation. Sergeant Sander, a man known for his unwavering composure, felt a chill run down his spine. The very foundation of his skepticism was crumbling, replaced by the undeniable truth that something beyond their understanding was at play. As the figure advanced, its distorted form sending ripples of unease through the guards, Sergeant Sander raised his flashlight in a gesture of caution. "Hold your ground," he ordered, his voice betraying a hint of trepidation. But just as the tense standoff seemed poised to escalate, the figure dissipated into the shadows, leaving behind only an echoing whisper that seemed to mock their presence. The guards exchanged a mixture of baffled and haunted glances. Their world had been upended, the line between reality and the supernatural blurred. The experiences that had haunted Justin were now their shared reality, a chilling testament to the malevolence that dwelled within the prison's walls. As they regrouped and resumed their patrol, a sense of unity emerged from the ashes of doubt. They were no longer isolated in their fear. Now, they were bound by an understanding that defied words. Each echoing footstep, every whispered murmur, served as a reminder that the prison's secrets were more terrifying than they could have ever imagined. The encounters were not limited to one man's imagination. They were a part of the prison's grim history, an echo of events that had long been forgotten. As the guards moved through the night, their flashlights casting eerie shadows that danced along the walls, they were acutely aware that they were no longer just guards of the living. They were guardians of a realm where the boundaries of life and death were thin, and where the darkness held secrets that begged to be revealed.